Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Air Florida Flight 90. First I'll look at the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. Due to the tragic collision between American Eagle Flight 5342 and the Army Black Hawk helicopter PAT-25 on January 29, 2025, there has been a lot of attention focused on another air tragedy which occurred about 43 years earlier. This one also involved the Potomac River, as well as a complete loss of a jetliner. On January 13, 1982, a Boeing 737-200 twin-engine jet airliner being operated as Air Florida Flight 90 was scheduled to depart from Washington National Airport at 2:15 p.m. This airport is now called Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. The plan was for Flight 90 to land in Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport after making a stop at Tampa International Airport. There were 74 passengers and 5 crew members on board. The aircraft was piloted by a young flight crew, 34-year-old Captain Larry Wheaton and 31-year-old First Officer Roger Pettit. At 1:38 p.m., the airport was closed due to a storm which brought 6.5 inches of snow. At 2:43 p.m., the airport reopened. As a result of the snowstorm, Flight 90 was running 1 hour and 45 minutes behind schedule. As the plane prepared for takeoff, snow was still falling, and it was 24 degrees Fahrenheit. The de-icing procedure ran into some difficulty due to confusion about what mixture should be applied. It appeared as though the plane was not properly de-iced. The ground crew struggled to get the plane pushed back from the gate due to ice on the ground. They were eventually able to push the aircraft back using a vehicle equipped with snow chains. Flight 90 waited in line for 49 minutes to get to the takeoff runway. During this time, ice and snow had accumulated on the wings. The flight crew was aware this was happening. They talked about it in the cockpit. The captain, Larry, was worried about getting further delayed, so he chose not to return to the gate for more de-icing. He also decided against using the engine de-icing systems. At 3:59 p.m., the plane initiated its takeoff roll. The first officer, Roger, noticed a discrepancy between the plane's performance and the instrument panel readings. The engine pressure ratio was reaching the limit before the throttles were fully engaged. He mentioned this to the captain, Larry, a few times. The captain dismissed the concerns. He had plenty of opportunities to abandon this takeoff, yet chose to press forward. The aircraft traveled 2,600 feet farther down the runway than it should have before achieving liftoff. It became airborne, but only reached an altitude of 352 feet before starting to descend. At 4:01 p.m., Flight 90 crashed into the 14th Street Bridge across the Potomac River. It had been in the air for just 30 seconds. The aircraft struck 7 vehicles on the bridge and destroyed 97 feet of guardrail. After this, it plunged into the Potomac River, breaking through the ice about 3/4 of a mile from the departure end of runway 36. The tail section of the plane was the only part above the surface of the water. 5 people were hanging on to the tail section of the aircraft: passengers Patricia Felch, Joe Stiley, Priscilla Tirado, and Arland Williams, as well as flight attendant Kelly Duncan. Floating in the water about 10 feet away was another passenger, Bert Hamilton. So at this point, there were 6 survivors in the water. The flight attendant, Kelly Duncan, gave a flotation device to the passenger, Patricia Felch, but other than this, the survivors really couldn't do anything to help themselves. They were stuck in the partially iced-over river. Many people on the shore attempted to help them, but the water was just too cold. 19 minutes after the crash, a United States Park Police helicopter arrived on the scene. There were 2 people on board the helicopter, pilot Donald Usher and paramedic Melvin Windsor. The plan was to drop a line into the water and attempt to pull survivors to the shore. They successfully did this for Bert Hamilton and returned to assist the 5 remaining survivors. Flying this close to the water was very dangerous. At one point, one of the skids of the helicopter went beneath the surface of the water. The paramedic dropped the line toward the tail section, and it was caught by Arland Williams. He was trapped in the wreckage and unable to get free. He passed the line to Kelly Duncan, and she was pulled to shore. The helicopter returned for a 3rd time. This time, the paramedic dropped 2 lines into the water because of concerns that these survivors would die from hypothermia. Once again, Arland Williams caught one line. He was still unable to free himself, so he passed the line to Joe Stiley, who was holding on to Priscilla Tirado. Patricia Felch grabbed the other line. The helicopter attempted to pull all three of them to the shore. Priscilla Tirado and Patricia Felch fell back into the water. The helicopter returned to Priscilla, but she did not have enough strength to grab the line. She kept letting go as the helicopter tried to get her to shore. Among the many people standing on the riverbank was a federal employee named Lenny Skutnik. He had been on his way home from the Congressional Budget Office when he saw what happened. Noticing that Priscilla wasn't going to make it to the riverbank, Lenny took off his coat and boots, dove into the water, and swam out to her. Lenny was able to pull her close enough to the shore so that other people could pull her out of the water. As this was going on, the helicopter flew back to Patricia Felch. The paramedic moved out to a landing skid, grabbed Patricia, and pulled her onto the skid with him. After taking her to shore, they flew back and tried to rescue Arland Williams, but by this point the tail section had rolled and Arland was submerged. He would be the only person aboard the aircraft who died by drowning. In total, the Flight 90 disaster claimed the lives of 4 motorists on the 14th Street Bridge, 70 passengers, and 4 crew members. 5 people on board the aircraft survived the crash. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. The cause of the Air Florida Flight 90 disaster was the flight crew's failure to follow proper de-icing procedures. There were a few different warning signs available to the crew that too much ice and snow had accumulated on the aircraft, including the confusing engine instrument readings. The first officer, Roger, pointed this out to the captain, Larry, but Larry ignored the warning. He was worried about getting further behind schedule. Item number 2. In honor of his heroism, the 14th Street Bridge was renamed after Arland Williams. Again, he was the passenger who handed the line to other people and eventually drowned. It appears as though Arland was trapped in the tail section. Escape was not possible for him. Rather than panicking and trying to escape anyway, Arland accepted his fate and used his last moments for good. He made the decision to save other people's lives by passing the line. Arland had an incredible impact on the lives of the people he saved. He died a hero. Item number 3. Lenny Skutnik was also a hero. He dove into the water and saved Priscilla Tirado. If he had decided not to do this, she would have certainly died. During an interview with the media, Lenny indicated that jumping into the water was something he never thought he would do. He said somebody had to go into the water. Not long after this disaster, Lenny was invited to Ronald Reagan's State of the Union address. This was the start of a tradition of ordinary citizens being invited to this event. These people are now referred to as Lenny Skutniks. Lenny has been extremely modest. He never viewed himself as a hero, never tried to attract attention, and never sought to cash in on his fame. Item number 4. Even though the story of Air Florida Flight 90 is a tragedy, it revealed an inspiring level of heroism. Ordinary citizens stepped up and worked to preserve life. They chose to act on their feelings of empathy and disregard their personal safety. In a world with so much division, selfishness, and resentment, it's hopeful to see a situation where everyone courageously worked to mitigate the loss of life during a disaster. The heroes of the story were able to realize what was important. They knew what would matter in the end. Some people wonder if they would rise up to the level of a hero if they encountered a disaster like this. Would they be willing to jump into the water to save someone's life? Well, there were hundreds of people on the bank of the Potomac River when Lenny jumped in. So the answer for most people is probably no. This doesn't make them terrible people. Some of them probably did not have the ability to swim or the ability to tolerate the cold water. The water temperature was 34 degrees Fahrenheit. They may not have even made it out to Priscilla. Rather, drowning immediately would have been more likely. This would have not helped anybody. It would have only compounded the tragedy. Lenny had an unusual combination of traits: the courage to jump in and the ability to actually save someone while swimming in frigid water. The actions of all the heroes that day, including Arland and Lenny, serve as a reminder that heroism is rarely some type of grand declaration. More often, it is a quiet decision made in a fleeting moment. Those are my thoughts on Air Florida Flight 90. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Over the years, this case has touched a lot of people. For those who remember this being broadcast on the news, it was really an incredible moment to see people trying to rescue those in the river, to see this helicopter flying around. Many people were risking their lives, and the outcome was definitely uncertain. I think the heroism of Arland Williams in particular had a great impact on a lot of people. He really illustrated the power of not feeling sorry for oneself. Arland was in a bad situation. He probably knew that his survival was unlikely. Instead of feeling sorry for himself, instead of being focused on his fate, he used his last moments to preserve life. He made something good out of something terrible. It is easy to forget this in the moment of action. People become scared, they become focused on loss, and they forget that there's still the possibility to do something beneficial to others. Arland Williams did not forget. As for Lenny Skutnik, he really illustrated the courage of seemingly ordinary people. Looking at the riverbank, there were hundreds of people standing there. Nobody would have guessed that Lenny was a hero among them, but he was. He was far from ordinary. He was willing to sacrifice his life to save somebody else's. Fortunately, he didn't have to. He survived. But he was willing to. It was incredibly courageous. A lot of people in similar circumstances would have just remained on the riverbank, paralyzed in fear. Again, there's nothing wrong with this. Fear is natural. But it is important to have heroes out there. It's important that there are people like Lenny who are willing to stand up and risk their lives to save others. He really was an inspiration for a lot of people over the years. This disaster, of course, caused a lot of pain and suffering, but it also serves as a reminder that there are heroes everywhere.